I signed the papers my daughter brought me while I was lying in a hospital bed, barely able to hold a pen, trusting her when she said it was just routine protection. 6 months later, I found out I had legally adopted her husband and left him everything I owned. That was the moment I realized I hadn't been recovering in that hospital. I had been quietly erased. Hello, my dear ones. I'll say this straight. No child should be handing papers to a 76-year-old mother in a hospital bed like that. If someone rushed me, I'd already be suspicious. But tell me honestly, would you have trusted your own daughter? If you're listening, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you have signed? My name is Clara Winslow Mercer, and I'm 76 years old. I used to think that was enough time to understand people, enough time to recognize when someone loved you, when someone needed you, and when someone was lying. Turns out, I was wrong about at least one of those things. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and something faintly metallic, like old coins. My left hip was wrapped tight, the pain dull but constant, and every movement felt like dragging a sack of gravel through my bones. The nurses spoke softly around me, as if I might shatter if they raised their voices. I suppose I looked fragile enough. Jolene stood beside my bed that afternoon, her coat still on, a structured cream thing with sharp shoulders. She always dressed like she was heading into a meeting, even when she was just visiting her mother. In her hands was a slim leather folio, the kind Amos used to carry when he handled contracts, back when we still had the hardware business. "Mom," she said gently, brushing a strand of hair away from my face, "I need you to sign a few things, just in case. You know, while you're here." "Just in case of what?" I asked, my voice thinner than I liked. "Medical stuff, property protection, temporary authority so I can help manage things while you recover." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's standard. Everyone does it. Everyone does it." That's what she said. I remember noticing how quickly everything moved after that. A man arrived, tall, narrow face, carrying a small case. Introduced himself as a notary. He barely looked at me, mostly at Jolene. There was no slow explanation, no careful reading line by line. Pages were flipped, corners tapped, lines indicated with a neat silver pen. "Right here, Mrs. Mercer. And here. And one more on this page." My hand trembled when I picked up the pen. Not dramatically, just enough that I had to steady it against the paper. I remember thinking how strange it felt, signing my name when I couldn't quite remember what day it was. They had given me something earlier, something that made the ceiling lights blur slightly at the edges. "Jolene," I said quietly, pausing before the first signature, "this won't change anything permanent, will it?" Her hand closed over mine, warm, reassuring. "Of course not. It's just protection. For you. For you." That's what she said, too. In the doorway, I caught a glimpse of Benton, my son-in-law, leaning against the wall, pretending not to watch. He gave me a small nod when our eyes met, like we were sharing some kind of understanding. At the time, I thought it was concern. Now I know better. I signed every page. I didn't rush. I wasn't forced. That's the worst part. I signed because I trusted her. Because I believed that whatever she was putting in front of me was meant to help me, not take something from me. The notary gathered the papers quickly after the last signature, stamped them with a quiet, efficient motion, and left without much ceremony. Jolene tucked the folio under her arm, kissed my forehead, and told me to rest. "You did great, Mom," she said softly. "Everything's taken care of now. Everything taken care of." I lay back against the pillows, exhausted, watching her leave the room. Benton followed her down the hall, his voice low. Something about timing, about getting copies. At the time, it all blurred together. The pain, the medication, the quiet hallway sounds, the distant beeping machines. I told myself I was safe, that my daughter was handling things, that whatever I had signed was just another layer of protection around a life I had already built. I had no idea I had just handed that life to someone else. The first few weeks after I came home passed in a quiet blur, the kind that feels almost peaceful until you start noticing the small things that don't quite sit right. My house on Briar Lantern Road hadn't changed. Same creaking floorboards, same lace curtains that filtered the afternoon light into something soft and forgiving. But I had. Everything felt slightly off, like a room where the furniture had been moved just an inch too far. Jolene came by often at first. Too often, if I'm being honest. She brought things I didn't ask for. Containers of soup I didn't like, labeled neatly in her handwriting. A pill organizer with compartments marked in bold black letters, even though I had managed my medications perfectly fine for years. Once, she even brought a tin of Calison's Dex, saying she thought I needed something refined. I hadn't eaten those since Amos and I visited Marseille decades ago. I took one out of politeness. It tasted like memory, and something else I couldn't name. "Mom, you shouldn't be lifting things," she'd say, moving items around my own kitchen as if she'd always lived there. "Let me handle it." Handle it. That phrase started to follow me around like a draft you can't quite locate. Benton began showing up more frequently too, always a step behind her, always with that same careful half-smile. He had a way of making himself look helpful without actually doing anything useful. "Morning, Clara," he said once, leaning casually against my doorframe. "How's our favorite lady doing today?" Our. I didn't like that word. Not then, not now. "I'm not a shared project, Benton," I replied, more sharply than I intended. He chuckled, like I'd made a charming little joke. "Just making sure you're taken care of." There it was again. Taken care of. He started asking questions that felt harmless at first. About the house, about the old walnut cabinet Amos kept locked, about whether I still had the original deed papers or if I'd streamlined everything already. "Just curious," he'd say lightly. "You know, paperwork these days gets messy." I told myself he was just being practical. That's what Jolene would say whenever I raised an eyebrow. "He's trying to help, Mom. Don't read into it." So I tried not to. But I noticed things. One afternoon, I stepped out to get the mail and found my neighbor, Tessa Mulrooney, standing by the fence with her gardening gloves still on. Tessa had lived next door for nearly 20 years, and she was the kind of woman who noticed everything without making a show of it. "Heard you had company again this morning," she said casually, brushing soil from her palms. "Jolene and Benton," I replied. "They've been attentive." Tessa gave a small hum, not quite agreement. "That's so." I waited, because with Tessa, silence usually meant more was coming. "He came by yesterday," she added after a moment. "While you were resting, I suppose. Asked me if I knew whether houses on this street were selling above market these days." I frowned. "Benton did." "Mm-hmm." She glanced toward my front door. "Seemed particularly interested in yours." I felt something tighten in my chest. Small, but unmistakable. Probably just making conversation. "Maybe." Tessa said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Just thought you'd want to know. That night, I walked through my house more slowly than usual. I ran my fingers along the edges of furniture Amos had built, paused by the walnut cabinet Benton had asked about, and stood longer than necessary in the hallway where old photographs lined the wall. Everything was still mine. It looked like mine. It felt like mine. But for the first time, a thought slipped in that didn't belong there before. What exactly had I signed? I tried to push it away. Told myself I was being paranoid, that pain medication and too much quiet can make a person imagine things. Jolene had said it was standard, temporary, protective. Still, the words lingered. Standard, temporary, for you. A few days later, Jolene stopped by alone. She stood in the doorway with that same composed posture, her coat perfectly pressed, her expression carefully neutral. "We should talk about simplifying things long term," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Just planning ahead, you know, in case recovery takes longer than expected." I watched her move through my living room like she was already arranging it in her mind. "Planning ahead for what?" I asked. "For everything," she replied smoothly. "Your assets, the house, responsibilities. It's just smarter this way." Smarter for whom, I wondered, but I didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, I nodded slowly, pretending I was still the same trusting woman lying in that hospital bed, the one who believed her daughter wouldn't put anything in front of her that could take something away, because by then, a quiet, stubborn instinct had already started to wake up inside me, and it was telling me something very simple. I needed to find out what those papers really said. 6 months later, I sat in a quiet office that smelled faintly of paper, ink, and something herbal, chamomile, perhaps, across from a woman who looked at documents the way a surgeon looks at scans. Focused, patient, precise. Her name was Priya Calder. I hadn't come in for anything dramatic. Just a small adjustment to my will, a simple change, really. I wanted to leave Amos's old pocket watch, the one with the hairline crack across the glass, to Elspeth Knoll, the young aide who helped me twice a week. She had a way of listening that reminded me of how people used to listen before everything became rushed and distracted. "It's nothing urgent," I had told Priya when I sat down. "Just a minor update." She nodded, sliding my file toward her. "Those are often the most important ones." I liked her immediately. She began flipping through the documents I had brought. Bank summaries, the original trust Amos and I had set up years ago, a copy of my current will. Everything was neat, organized, the way I'd always kept things. Then she paused, not dramatically, just stopped. Her fingers rested on one page a moment longer than necessary. Her eyes moved back, then forward again, slower this time. "Mrs. Mercer," she said calmly, "before we continue, I need to ask you something." "Of course." "Do you recall completing any legal adoption paperwork in the last year?" I smiled at that, a small, confused smile. "Adoption? At my age?" Her expression didn't change. "I'm serious," she said gently. The smile faded. "No," I answered. "Of course not." Priya didn't argue. She simply turned the document toward me and rotated it slightly so I could read it without straining. "Then I think you should look at this." At first, the words didn't register. My eyes skimmed the page the way they do when you expect to find nothing of importance. Legal formatting, dense paragraphs, formal language. Then I saw my name, Clara Winslow Mercer, and below it, another name, Benton Rusk, adoptive son. I blinked once, then again slower. That's not correct," I said. though my voice came out quieter than I intended. There must be some mistake. Priya didn't interrupt. She let me read, line by line, signature by signature. There it was, my handwriting. Slightly uneven, but unmistakably mine. Dated the same week I had been in the hospital. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. No, I said again, this time more firmly. I never agreed to this. I would remember something like that. Priya folded her hands calmly. That's what concerns me. I looked up at her, my pulse beginning to thrum in my ears. What does this mean? I asked. She didn't rush the answer. It means, she said carefully, that under the law, Benton Rusk is now legally recognized as your son. The word son landed heavily. Wrong. Foreign. That's absurd, I said. He's my daughter's husband. Yes, she nodded, but legally, that distinction has now been altered. I stared back at the document, my eyes drawn to the signatures again. My signatures. How could this even happen? I whispered. Priya tapped lightly on another section of the file. There's more. I didn't want there to be more, but I looked anyway. An older clause. One Amos had insisted on years ago. Something about keeping assets within direct family lineage. At the time, it had seemed like a formality. A way to keep things simple. Now it read like a trap I had built myself. With this clause, Priya explained, any legally recognized child, biological or adopted, becomes a primary beneficiary of your estate. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly. And Jolene? I asked. She remains your daughter, of course, Priya said. But this changes the structure entirely, depending on how the rest is interpreted. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I understood. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting in my lap, suddenly very still. 6 months. For 6 months they had known. For 6 months they had said nothing. Mrs. Mercer, Priya said gently, I need you to think carefully. Do you remember signing anything in the hospital that might not have been fully explained to you? And just like that, I was back there. The smell, the lights, the pen in my hand, Jolene's voice. For you. My fingers tightened slightly against the fabric of my dress. Yes, I said quietly. I remember signing something. I lifted my head and met Priya's eyes, and for the first time since walking into that office, my voice was completely steady. But I didn't know what I was signing. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Not fear, not confusion. Something colder, something clearer. Because now I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. I didn't go home right away after leaving Priya's office. I sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people walk past like nothing in the world had changed. Someone laughed across the street. A woman carried a paper bag of pastries. I caught a hint of sugared almonds and warm brioche, even through the glass. Life moved the same way it always had. Only mine had been rearranged without my permission. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly as it always did. White shutters, slightly crooked mailbox, the old wind chime Amos had hung that still made that soft, hollow sound when the breeze passed through. It should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like something I had to defend. I didn't even make it halfway up the front steps before I saw Jolene's car already parked along the curb. Of course she was here. I unlocked the door slowly and stepped inside. She was standing in the kitchen, back straight, hands resting lightly on the counter like she owned the space. You went out, she said, turning toward me. Her tone was calm, but there was something tight underneath it. You didn't tell me. I didn't know I needed permission, I replied, setting my bag down. Her lips pressed together for a moment. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Jolene? There was a pause, just long enough. I stopped by earlier, she said, shifting slightly. You weren't here. I got worried. I walked past her, deliberately slow, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. I met with a lawyer today, I said. That did it. The air changed instantly. A lawyer? She repeated too quickly. Why would you? To update my will, I interrupted, turning to face her. Just a small change. That's all it was supposed to be. Her expression didn't crack, but I saw it. That flicker behind her eyes. The moment something inside her recalculated. Well, she said carefully, that's responsible. I'm glad you're thinking ahead. Oh, I am, I nodded. Much more carefully now. Before she could respond, the front door opened again without a knock. Benton. He stepped inside like he belonged there. Keys already in his hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. Afternoon, Clara, he said smoothly. Jolene said you might be back soon? I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. Really looked this time. At the way he carried himself. At how comfortable he was. At how little surprise there was in his face seeing me stand there. How long were you planning to wait? I asked. The smile faltered, just slightly. For what? He said. For telling me, I replied. Jolene stepped in quickly. Mom, I think you're misunderstanding. No, I said, sharper now. I'm starting to understand very clearly. I reached into my bag and pulled out the document Priya had printed for me. The copy. The one with my name and his. I placed it flat on the counter between us. Would either of you like to explain, I said calmly, how I legally adopted my own son-in-law without knowing it? Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Benton's eyes dropped to the paper, then back to me. He didn't look shocked. Not really. Just caught. Jolene's face went pale. Mom, she started, but her voice was thinner now. I signed papers in a hospital bed, I continued, my voice steady, controlled. You told me they were for protection. Temporary. Routine. They were, she insisted quickly. You're just interpreting it wrong. Then explain it to me, I said. That's when Benton stepped forward. Clara, he began, tone smooth again, practiced. Let's not turn this into something dramatic. It's just a legal structure, a formality to simplify inheritance and... A formality, I repeated, my eyes locking onto his. You became my son on paper. That's your definition of a formality? It doesn't change anything emotionally, he said. It just streamlines things. Streamlines what? Future transitions, he replied. There it was, not even hidden. Jolene grabbed his arm lightly. Benton, maybe we should... No, I said, raising a hand. Let him finish. He looked at me for a moment, then exhaled slowly, as if deciding something. You've built a valuable estate, Clara, he said plainly. This way, everything stays organized, protected, within the family. Within the family, I echoed. Yes. I tilted my head slightly. And why? I asked quietly. Was I not told? That question hung in the air longer than anything else. Jolene looked down. Benton didn't answer. Now look at this moment. She's standing in her own kitchen holding proof, and they're still talking like it's paperwork, not betrayal. Tell me, would you keep your voice calm like Clara, or would you throw them out right there? Me? I wouldn't let them finish a sentence. I let the silence stretch. Because for the first time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't unsure. I wasn't the woman in that hospital bed anymore. I knew exactly what I was looking at. And they knew I knew. I didn't raise my voice. That surprised even me. Instead, I folded the paper once, neatly, carefully, and set it aside like it was something ordinary. Like it didn't just rewrite my entire life. So, I said, resting my hands on the counter, you both decided this was efficient. Jolene stepped forward. Mom, please don't make it sound like we did something terrible. We were trying to protect you. From what? I asked. She hesitated. Benton didn't. From complications later on, legal delays, probate issues. You don't realize how messy these things get. I've handled my affairs for 50 years, I replied quietly. I think I understand messy. That shut him up for a moment. Jolene tried again, softer this time. You were in the hospital, you were vulnerable. We had to act quickly. I looked at her then. Really looked. You mean I was weak enough not to question you? Her face tightened. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is signing away control of my life while I couldn't even sit up properly. Silence again. Benton shifted his weight, glancing toward the living room like he was already calculating his next move. Clara, you're focusing on the wrong part of this. Nothing has actually changed. You still live here. You still have access to everything. Access? I repeated slowly. That word landed differently, not ownership. Access. I let that settle between us. Tell me something, I said, keeping my tone even. If nothing has changed, why didn't you tell me the truth 6 months ago? Jolene opened her mouth, but no answer came out. Because there wasn't one. Instead, Benton stepped closer again, lowering his voice slightly. We were waiting for the right moment. You needed time to recover. No, I said. This time, I didn't hesitate. You were waiting until it was too late for me to do anything about it. That hit. Jolene looked away first. Benton didn't deny it. And that told me everything I needed to know. I picked up the folded paper again, sliding it back into my bag. Well, I said calmly, you should have waited a little longer. Jolene frowned. What do you mean? I met her eyes, steady and clear. It means, I said, I've already started asking questions. For the first time since I walked into that kitchen, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not confidence, not control. Fear. That word stayed with me long after they left. Fear. It lingered in the quiet corners of my house, in the faint ticking of the clock Amos had repaired 3 times before he passed, in the way the evening light stretched across the floor like it was trying to reach something just out of sight. I didn't sit down. I didn't make tea. I didn't allow myself the usual comforts. Instead, I went straight to the hallway cabinet and pulled out the old tin box where I kept documents I didn't need often, but trusted enough not to lock away. Insurance copies, discharge papers, folded receipts, and the thin plastic envelope they had given me when I left the hospital. My hands were steady now. That surprised me too. I spread everything across the dining table, pushing aside the embroidered runner Jolene had once called outdated. The paper edges scratched softly against the wood as I sorted them, one by one, building a timeline without even realizing I was doing it. Admission date, surgery, medication logs, visitor passes. Then I found it, a small, crumpled slip tucked between 2 sheets, barely noticeable. A visitor badge receipt. The name printed across it wasn't Jolene's, Callum Vire, the notary. I stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. He hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. He had been arranged. I sat down slowly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. For a brief second, a wave of something tried to rise. Anger, maybe, or grief. But I pushed it down before it could take shape. Emotion would come later. Right now, I needed clarity. I reached for the phone and dialed the hospital records department. The line rang longer than I expected, a dull mechanical rhythm that felt oddly distant. When someone finally answered, her voice was polite, rehearsed. "Records office, how may I assist you?" "My name is Clara Winslow Mercer," I said. "I need a full copy of every document I signed during my stay 6 months ago, and the visitor log for the day the notary was present." There was a pause. "I can help with medical documentation," she said carefully, "but visitor logs are limited access." "I was the patient," I replied, "and I'm requesting my own records." Another pause. Slightly longer this time. "I'll need to verify your identity and submit a request form. It may take a few days." "That's fine," I said. "Start the process today." As she listed the necessary details, I wrote everything down in Amos's old ledger, the same one he used to track hardware orders decades ago. The pages were yellowed, but the lines were still straight. Reliable. When the call ended, I didn't feel relieved. I felt focused. There's a difference. The house had gone completely quiet by then. No footsteps. No voices. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing outside. For the first time in months, I noticed how peaceful that silence was. Not empty. Protected. I stood up and walked toward the walnut cabinet Benton had asked about. The key was exactly where Amos had always kept it, hidden behind a loose panel. I opened it slowly. Inside were things no one else had bothered to ask about. Original deed papers, old investment certificates, a small velvet pouch with jewelry I hadn't worn in years, and at the bottom, a thin folder marked in Amos's handwriting. Contingencies. I pulled it out carefully, dust brushing off the edges. Amos had never been careless. If there was a system, there was always a backup. I sat back down and opened the folder. Legal language, dense, precise. But one line stood out immediately. In the event of coercion, misrepresentation, or diminished capacity during execution of legal documents. I stopped reading. My fingers rested lightly on the page. For the first time since leaving Priya's office, I allowed myself a small breath that wasn't tight with pressure. Because suddenly, this didn't feel like something done to me. It felt like something that could be undone. I closed the folder gently and placed it beside the rest of the documents. Then I picked up the phone again. This time, I didn't call the hospital. I called Priya. "I think," I said when she answered, my voice calm and certain. "I just found where they made their first mistake." Jolene didn't wait long before trying again. 2 days after that conversation in my kitchen, she called me in the morning with a tone so carefully soft, it almost sounded rehearsed. "Mom," she said, "we should talk. Properly, not like last time." "I thought we already did," I replied. "No," she said quickly. "That wasn't a conversation. That was emotional. Benton thinks it would be better if we all sat down somewhere neutral." Neutral. That word told me everything I needed to know. "Where?" I asked. "My office," she said. "Benton's already here. We can go through everything calmly. Clear things up." Clear things up? Yes. I was certain that's exactly what they wanted to do. I agreed. Not because I trusted them, because I wanted to hear how far they were willing to go. Benton's office sat on the 3rd floor of a polished glass building downtown. Everything about it was sleek, controlled, deliberately impressive. The kind of place designed to make people feel smaller than the decisions being made inside it. I walked in alone. Jolene stood as soon as she saw me, offering a quick smile that didn't quite settle. Benton remained seated behind the desk, fingers steepled, like he'd been waiting for a negotiation rather than a conversation. "Clara," he said smoothly, "thank you for coming." I didn't respond. I simply took the chair across from them. On the table in front of me were brochures, glossy, expensive, Marigold House, private senior living. I picked one up without asking. Soft lighting in every photo. Smiling staff. Garden paths. Little porcelain teacups arranged beside lavender macarons as if aging were something you could decorate your way out of. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jolene said quickly. "We thought you'd love it." "I didn't say I was going anywhere," I replied. Benton leaned forward slightly. "Clara, let's be realistic. This house—" He gestured vaguely, as if my home were already an inconvenience, "is a lot to manage. Maintenance, taxes, safety concerns. I've managed it just fine so far." "That was before the fall?" he said calmly. There it was. Not concern. Positioning. Jolene reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't return the gesture either. "We're just trying to make sure you're comfortable," she said. "Somewhere secure, with proper care." "And what happens to this house while I'm being cared for?" I asked. Silence. Benton answered instead. "It would make sense to put it on the market," he said, "while the value is still strong." Still strong, as if it were already declining. I set the brochure down. "Interesting," I said quietly. Jolene shifted. "Mom, please don't twist this." "I'm not twisting anything," I replied. "I'm listening." And I was, carefully, every word, every hesitation, because now I could see the shape of it, not just what they'd done, but what they planned to do next. Benton leaned back in his chair, watching me more closely now. "You have to understand," he said, voice lower, more direct. "This is about transition, planning ahead, making things easier before they become difficult." "For you," I said. His expression tightened just slightly. "For everyone," he corrected. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. Then I reached for the brochure again, and something slipped out from between the pages. A folded sheet, not meant to be seen. I opened it. Numbers. Projected sale value. Closing estimates. Distribution columns. And next to one of them, Benton's name. Not small, not symbolic. Substantial. I didn't react immediately. I just folded the paper again, carefully, and placed it back on the table. "I see," I said. Jolene's eyes flicked to Benton for a fraction of a second. Too quick, too telling. "So that's the plan," I continued, my voice calm. "Move me out, sell the house, simplify everything." "You're making it sound harsh," Jolene said. "No," I replied. "I'm making it sound accurate." Benton didn't deny it this time. Instead, he leaned forward again, studying me. "You're sharper than I expected," he said. That almost made me smile. "Then you should have expected more," I answered. The room went quiet, because something had shifted again. Not just in me, in them. They were starting to realize. I wasn't playing the role they had prepared for me, and that made me far more dangerous than they had planned for. The envelope from the hospital arrived 3 days later. Plain. White. Too light for something that carried that much weight. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. Chamomile this time, not because I needed calming, but because Amos always said you should do ordinary things before facing extraordinary ones. It keeps your head steady. I sat at the dining table, the same place where I had laid out all the documents before, and slid my finger under the flap. Inside were copies. Every form, every signature, every timestamp. I laid them out slowly, one by one, aligning the edges with care. The same way I used to organize invoices when we still had the shop. Patterns reveal themselves when things are in order. And then I saw it. A nurse's note. Small, almost insignificant compared to the legal documents, but it stopped me cold. Patient disoriented following medication. Repeatedly asked for spouse. Deceased. Unable to maintain consistent awareness of time and situation. The timestamp sat just above it. 11:40 a.m. My eyes moved to the next page. Notary acknowledgement. Time of signing. 11:52 a.m. 12 minutes. 12 minutes between confusion and legal consent. I leaned back slowly in my chair, the paper still in my hand. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was something quieter. Something colder. Precision. I reached for the phone and called Priya. She was under medication, I said the moment she answered. There's a record. Disorientation. Exact timing. Priya didn't interrupt. I could hear her already shifting into focus. That's significant, she said. Very significant. There's more, I added. The notary arrived during that window. A pause. Then, quietly. Then we may have a case for incapacity. Case. Such a small word for something that could dismantle everything they had built. I want everything pulled, I said. The full timeline, the visitor log, the notary's record, all of it. We'll need to move carefully, Priya replied. If they realize what you've found, they already know I'm asking questions, I said. Let them wonder how much I know. Silence on the other end for a moment. Then, all right, I'll start the process. When the call ended, I didn't move right away. I just sat there, looking at the papers spread across the table. For 6 months, they had been ahead of me. Every step calculated. Every move quiet. But now, I had something they didn't expect. Proof that I hadn't been fully aware. Proof that what I signed might not hold. Look at this carefully. She's sitting alone, no shouting, no panic, just facts in front of her. If you were Clara, would you confront them immediately or stay quiet and build your case? Me? I'd stay silent a little longer. Let them think they're still winning. I gathered the papers back into the envelope, slower this time, more deliberate. Because now the situation had changed. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a mistake. Their mistake. And the kind of mistake that could unravel everything. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. Nothing looked different. But I knew better now. The game they started in that hospital room wasn't over. It had just turned. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. That's what I realized in the days that followed. Everything they said, everything they did, it all started lining up too neatly. Jolene's sudden concern, Benton's interest in paperwork, the notary appearing exactly when I was least capable of asking questions. Even the way they kept repeating the same words. Protection, simplification, transition. It wasn't care. It was preparation. And I had been the last one to understand it. But not anymore. I didn't call them. Not after finding the hospital records. Not after speaking to Priya again. I let the silence stretch. Because silence does something interesting to people like Jolene and Benton. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes them talk. The first call came from Jolene. "Mom, you've been quiet," she said, her voice carefully measured. "Is everything okay?" "I've been resting," I replied simply. A pause. "Well, good," she said. "That's good. You need to take it easy." Take it easy. I almost smiled. That same evening, Benton called. Direct. No softness. "We need to finalize a few things," he said. "There are timelines involved." "Timelines for what?" I asked. "For the property," he replied. "And your transition. We shouldn't delay unnecessarily." Unnecessarily? "That sounds urgent," I said. "It is," he answered without hesitation. That told me something too. They were moving faster now. Faster than before. Which meant one thing. They felt something shifting. Even if they didn't know exactly what. The next day, I went out. Not to meet Priya. Not yet. I went somewhere else. The bank. The same one Amos and I had used for decades, with its polished counters and the faint scent of old paper and furniture polish. The kind of place where people still remembered your name if you'd been there long enough. "Mrs. Mercer," the manager said when I stepped into his office. "Good to see you. How can I help?" "I'd like a full review of my accounts," I said calmly. "Access, authorizations, everything." He nodded, typing quickly. Then his expression shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No," he said too quickly. "Just confirming a few details." I waited, because now I knew when to wait. "You've recently added an additional authorized individual to several accounts," he said carefully. "Joint oversight, limited control." My pulse didn't change. "Who?" I asked, but I already knew. He turned the screen slightly toward me. "Benton Rusk, authorized. Not owner, but close enough to matter." "When was this added?" I asked. He checked. "Same time frame as your hospital stay." "Of course it was." I nodded slowly. "Can it be reviewed?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "with proper documentation." "Good." I stood up, smoothing the sleeve of my coat. "Then I'll be back with that," I said. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner, because now the picture was complete. This wasn't just about the house or the adoption. They had been building layers, quietly, legally, step by step. And they thought I was too slow, too old, too trusting to ever catch up. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the wheel. Then I reached into my bag and took out Amos's old ledger. On the next empty page, I wrote 3 names: Jolene, Benton, Callum Vire. And beneath them, 1 word: timeline. Because that's what this had become. Not a family problem, not even just a betrayal. A sequence. And if you follow a sequence carefully enough, you find the break, and once you find the break, everything starts to fall apart. Finding the break in a plan like theirs doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone gets careless or confident. Usually both. Priya called me 2 days after my visit to the bank. "I found him," she said without preamble. "Callum Vire?" I asked. "Yes, mobile notary. Works independently now. Small office above a repair shop on Linton Street." I didn't respond right away. "Do we approach him?" I asked. "We do," she said. "But carefully. If he feels exposed, he might shut down." "Or talk," I replied. There was a pause. "Yes," Priya said. "Or talk." The office was exactly what I expected. Narrow staircase, worn carpet. A faint ticking sound from the shop below. Clocks, all slightly out of sync, creating a strange, uneven rhythm that followed you upstairs. Callum Vire opened the door himself. He recognized me immediately. I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of memory snapping into place. Mrs. Mercer, he said, a bit too quickly. I wasn't expecting. No, I replied calmly. You weren't. Priya stepped forward beside me. We won't take much of your time. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. The office was small, papers stacked neatly, but not professionally. A man who worked alone, no system beyond his own habits. Good. That kind of person leaves traces. I remember the hospital, he said, before we even sat down. Everything was done properly, fully legal. No greeting, no small talk, straight to defense. Also good. Priya didn't challenge him immediately. She placed a folder on his desk and opened it slowly. Timestamp, she said, sliding a page forward. Nurse's report. Patient disoriented 12 minutes before signing. Callum's eyes moved across the paper, just for a second, but that was enough. I don't assess medical condition, he said carefully. I verify identity and willingness to sign. Willingness? I asked quietly. He looked at me then, really looked, and I could see it. The moment he remembered. The room, the bed, my voice. Do you remember asking me if I understood what I was signing? I continued. Silence. I follow standard procedure, he said, but it came out weaker now. Priya leaned forward slightly. Who contacted you for that appointment? Another pause. Longer this time. I get referrals, he said. From whom? No answer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move closer. I just spoke. Mr. Vire, I said, calm and steady. I was under medication. There is a record. If this document is challenged, your role will be examined very closely. That did it. Not anger. Not pressure. Clarity. He exhaled slowly and sat back. It was arranged in advance, he admitted. Mr. Rusk contacted me directly, said it was urgent, offered additional compensation for same-day service. There it was. Benton. Out loud. And my daughter? I asked. Callum hesitated, then nodded once. She was present the entire time. Did she explain the documents to me? I asked. Another pause. She summarized them, he said carefully. How? Priya asked. Callum swallowed slightly. She said they were standard protections, temporary authorizations, that everything would remain under your control. I didn't react, because I already knew that part. But then he added something else, something smaller, something sharper. She also asked me not to read everything aloud, he said. Said you were tired, that it might confuse you. Silence filled the room, not heavy this time, clear, defined. Because that wasn't a misunderstanding. That was intent. Priya closed the folder slowly. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement? Callum didn't answer immediately. He looked between us, then down at the desk. Finally. Yes, he said. If I'm protected. You will be, Priya replied. I stood up, not rushed, not shaken, just finished. Because now the plan wasn't just visible, it was documented. As we stepped out into the stairwell, the uneven ticking of the clocks followed us down again. But this time, it didn't sound chaotic. It sounded like a countdown, because Benton hadn't just made a move, he had left a trail. And now, I had it. I chose the date carefully. Not my actual birthday. That was still weeks away. But close enough to make it believable, far enough to give me time. Just a small gathering, I told Jolene over the phone. Nothing formal. I thought it might be nice to have everyone over. She sounded relieved. That was the first sign I'd made the right decision. That's a wonderful idea, Mom, she said quickly. We were actually hoping you'd soften a little. So that's what she thought this was. Softening. I let her believe it. The morning of the luncheon, I woke up earlier than usual. Not from anxiety, from clarity. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, setting things exactly where I wanted them. The tablecloth Amos had always liked. Pale ivory, slightly worn at the edges. The good plates, the ones Jolene once said were too traditional. I even took out the small silver forks reserved for desserts. For them, I prepared food. For myself, I prepared the room. Lemon chess pie cooling by the window, smoked trout tartines arranged neatly on a porcelain tray, and, for no reason other than memory, a delicate pink blancmange that looked almost too elegant to eat. Elspeth arrived just before noon. "You're sure about this?" she asked quietly, setting her bag down near the kitchen door. "Yes," I replied. She hesitated. "And everything is in place?" I nodded once. She didn't ask anything else. That's what I appreciated about her. She understood when silence mattered more than questions. They arrived together. Jolene first, composed as always, though I noticed she had chosen a softer outfit than usual. Less sharp. More careful. Benton followed, carrying a bottle of wine he clearly hadn't chosen himself. "Clara," he said, stepping inside with that same practiced ease, "this looks lovely." "It's my house," I replied. "It usually does." A flicker in his expression. Gone just as quickly. More guests filtered in. A cousin or two. Tessa from next door. Even a distant relative I hadn't seen in years. Enough people to make the room feel full. Enough people to make it matter. We sat, we ate, we talked. On the surface, everything looked exactly like a normal family gathering. Laughter, small conversations, the clink of silverware against porcelain. But underneath, tension, waiting. Benton couldn't help himself. He leaned toward me midway through the meal, voice low enough that only I could hear. "I've been reviewing some offers," he said. "Strong interest in the property. We could move quickly if needed." I turned my head slightly, meeting his eyes. "Repeat that," I said. He didn't hesitate. "I said," he replied, just as quietly, "we have a buyer who can close fast." It would simplify everything. Simplify. Always that word. Behind him, in the reflection of the glass cabinet, I caught a glimpse of Elspeth standing still near the doorway, listening, exactly where she needed to be. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "Interesting," I said. Jolene noticed the exchange. "What are you two discussing?" she asked, her tone light but controlled. "Future plans," Benton answered smoothly. Of course he did. I let the moment pass. I didn't argue, didn't challenge, didn't reveal anything, because this wasn't the moment. Not yet. Instead, I picked up my glass and took a small sip, letting the room settle back into its polite rhythm. Because what they didn't understand was that this wasn't a family gathering, it was a stage, and every word they spoke, every assumption they made, was being placed exactly where I needed it. The shift happened quietly, so quietly that, at first, only I seemed to notice it. The room was still full of polite conversation. Someone asking about travel, someone else laughing too loudly at something that wasn't particularly funny. The lemon chess pie had been cut, plates passed around, forks tapping lightly against porcelain. On the surface, it was perfect. Exactly the kind of gathering Jolene would later describe as family harmony. Then the front door opened. No knock, just a calm, deliberate movement. Priya Calder stepped inside first, composed as ever, a thin folder in her hands. Behind her came Callum Vire, noticeably less confident than he had been in his office. And just behind them, a man in a neutral suit carrying a leather case. The room didn't go silent all at once. It unraveled. Conversation slowed. Forks paused midair. Eyes shifted, one by one, toward the doorway. Jolene was the first to stand. "Mom, what is this?" she asked, her voice already losing its balance. Benton didn't move, but I saw it. That stillness. That calculation snapping into place. "Perfect timing," I said calmly, placing my fork down beside my plate. Priya stepped forward without hesitation. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, her tone professional but clear, "as discussed." I nodded once. Then I looked around the table, at every face, at every expression that had, just moments ago, been so comfortably unaware. "I asked you all here," I said, my voice steady, "because I wanted witnesses." That word landed harder than anything else. Witnesses. Jolene's face went pale. "Mom, this isn't necessary." "It is," I interrupted. Priya opened the folder. "6 months ago," she began, her voice carrying cleanly through the room, "Mrs. Mercer signed a series of legal documents while hospitalized. These documents included an adult adoption, naming Mr. Benton Rusk as her legal son." A murmur spread across the table. Confusion. Disbelief. Good. "However," Priya continued, "we now have medical records indicating that at the time of signing, Mrs. Mercer was under strong medication and documented as disoriented." Callum shifted beside her, uncomfortable, but present. "Additionally," Priya said, glancing briefly toward him, "the notary present at the time has provided a statement confirming that the documents were not fully explained and that certain disclosures were intentionally minimized." That's when Benton stood, slowly, controlled. "This is absurd," he said. "You're turning a simple legal structure into some kind of accusation." "No," I said, finally rising to my feet as well. "I'm turning it into the truth." I stepped slightly forward, not toward Benton, but toward the center of the room. "You thought I wouldn't understand," I said, my voice calm but carrying. "That I wouldn't remember. That I would accept whatever you told me afterward." Jolene shook her head quickly. "That's not true. You told the notary not to read everything," I said, cutting through her words. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Callum lowered his eyes. Benton's expression hardened. "That's not—" Jolene started again, but her voice broke this time. "I didn't raise mine. I didn't need to." "There's more," Priya said, stepping forward again. She placed another document on the table. "A recorded statement," she said, "regarding the planned sale of Mrs. Mercer's property." Now Benton moved, sharp. "That recording is illegal." "No," Priya replied calmly. "It was obtained within legal boundaries." I watched him then, not as my son-in-law, not as family, but as a man whose plan had just been placed under light. And for the first time, he didn't look in control. The room stayed silent. No one moved, because now everyone could see it. Not just me, not just pieces of it, all of it. And there was no way to fold it back into something harmless anymore. Now look at this moment. The table is set, the guests are sitting, and suddenly, the entire story changes in front of everyone. Tell me honestly, would you go this far, or would you try to solve it quietly? Me? I'd do exactly this, because some things need witnesses. For a moment, no one spoke. Not Jolene, not Benton, not even the guests who, just minutes ago, had been laughing over dessert. The air in the room felt different now, heavier, sharper, like something invisible had finally been pulled into the open, where it couldn't be ignored. Benton was the first to try to regain control. "This proves nothing," he said, his voice tighter now, less polished. "You have assumptions, fragments, interpretations. That's not enough to undo a legal document." Priya didn't respond. She didn't need to. Callum did. "I verified the signature," he said, his voice unsteady. "But I was told the documents had already been explained, that she understood them fully." Every word seemed to land harder than the last. Benton turned toward him sharply. "Be careful what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Callum replied, quieter now, but not backing down. "I'm stating what happened." That was the moment Benton lost something. Not everything, but enough. Because control doesn't disappear all at once. It slips. And everyone in that room felt it. Jolene sat down slowly, her hands trembling just slightly as they rested in her lap. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She couldn't. "Mom," she said, her voice barely holding together. "We didn't mean for it to look like this." I watched her, carefully, because this was the first time she wasn't performing. "Then how did you mean for it to look?" I asked. She didn't answer, because there wasn't a version of this that looked better. Priya stepped forward again, calm, precise. "The adoption will be formally challenged," she said, "based on documented incapacity and procedural concerns. Until then, all related claims to property and financial authority will be frozen." Frozen. That word moved through the room like a quiet shock. Benton let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You think this ends here?" he said. "You think this just disappears because you made a scene at lunch?" "I think," I replied calmly, "it doesn't survive scrutiny." That stopped him, because he knew what scrutiny meant. Records, statements, timelines, everything he had hoped would stay buried under signatures and silence. Jolene finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red now. Real tears. Not controlled. Not measured. "You could have just talked to me," she said, almost pleading. "You didn't have to do it like this." That almost hurt. Almost. "I tried," I said quietly. "You just didn't tell me the truth." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was recognition. The kind you can't argue with. From the far end of the table, Tessa spoke for the first time. "Clara," she said simply, "you did the right thing." A small sentence, but it settled something in the room. Because now it wasn't just my voice. It wasn't just my version. Others had seen enough. Heard enough. Understood enough. Benton looked around then. Really looked. And for the first time, he realized something important. He wasn't controlling the room anymore. He wasn't controlling the narrative. He wasn't even controlling the outcome. Without another word, he stepped back. Not dramatically, not angrily, just stepped away, toward the door. Jolene didn't follow him. She stayed where she was. And that told me more than anything she could have said. Because whatever this had been built on, it was already breaking. The house felt different after they left. Not empty. Cleared. Chairs slightly out of place, half-finished glasses on the table, the faint scent of lemon and tea still lingering in the air. But underneath all that, something else had settled. Silence that wasn't heavy anymore. Silence that belonged to me. I didn't rush to clean up. I didn't follow anyone outside. I simply stood there for a moment, letting the room breathe again. Elspeth moved quietly beside me, gathering plates without asking. Tessa lingered near the doorway, arms crossed, watching the street like she always did. "They won't come back the same way," she said. "I know," I replied. And I did. The legal process didn't take weeks. It took precision. Priya moved fast, faster than Benton expected. The challenge to the adoption was filed with supporting medical records, Callum's sworn statement, and the documented timeline that left no room for interpretation. 12 minutes. That was all it took to start this. And that was all it took to unravel it. Benton tried, of course. He pushed back, delayed, questioned the validity of records, suggested confusion, even implied that I was being influenced. But pressure reveals more than strength. It reveals limits, and his came quickly. Within a short time, his tone changed, from confident to cautious, from cautious to quiet. In the end, he didn't fight all the way through. He couldn't, because the deeper it went, the worse it looked. So he agreed, relinquished any claim tied to the adoption, stepped back before the situation turned into something far more public. Clean on paper, but not forgotten. Jolene didn't disappear. She came once, a week later. No sharp coat this time, no controlled posture. Just stood at the door like she wasn't sure she still belonged there. I let her in. We didn't sit in the kitchen. We didn't pretend. "You should have trusted me," she said quietly. I looked at her for a long moment. "I did," I replied. That was enough. She didn't argue, because there was nothing left to argue. "I don't expect things to go back," she added. "They won't," I said. Another silence. Then she nodded and left. The house stayed mine, legally, completely. Priya helped me rebuild everything properly. A new trust, protected this time, clear and deliberate. No shortcuts, no assumptions. The house cannot be sold without my consent. The accounts cannot be accessed without my approval. Every signature now is understood. I made decisions too, not out of anger, out of clarity. Elspeth now has a fund set aside for her future. Education, stability, something she never asked for, but earned simply by standing where others stepped back. Tessa's grandson will get Amos's fishing rods one day. She laughed when I told her, but I saw what it meant to her. And Jolene remains in my will, but not as she once was. Some things, if they are to be rebuilt, must be rebuilt slowly and honestly. This morning, I sat on the porch with a slice of lemon chess pie and a cup of tea that had gone slightly cold. The wind chime moved gently in the breeze. Same sound, same house, same life. Only now, fully mine again. I took another bite of the pie, sweet and sharp at the same time, and looked out at the quiet street. 76 years, and I had just learned something new. Trust isn't what protects your life. Understanding does. I'll say this clearly. I wouldn't have waited as long as Clara did. I would have stopped it earlier, maybe even before it reached this point. But she did something just as strong. She finished it properly, and that matters. If you made it this far, subscribe, like the video, and tell me. Would you forgive, or would you walk away completely?